The events I'm about to recount took place in the remote barrio of San Miguel, Iloilo, where the boundary between myth and reality dissolves like morning mist. As a researcher of Philippine folklore, I've documented countless tales of supernatural encounters, but none have left me as fundamentally changed as what transpired during my investigation of the Aswang deaths in the summer of 2023. It began with a series of mysterious animal mutilations. Goats were found with their internal organs precisely removed, dogs appeared drained of blood, and chickens were discovered with peculiar puncture wounds in their necks. The locals whispered about shadows that moved against the wind and the sound of leathery wings in the darkness. But what truly caught my attention was the pattern. Each incident occurred in a perfectly straight line, moving steadily toward the center of San Miguel. I arrived in early June when the heat hung heavy in the air and the scent of sampaguita blossoms mixed with something else, something metallic and ancient. Maria Santos, my local contact and a respected Manguihilot traditional healer, met me at the bus station. Her usual warm smile was replaced by deep lines of worry as she guided me through the narrow streets to her home. "The Aswang has returned," she said quietly, closing her wooden shutters despite the suffocating heat. "But this time, it's different. This one is dying." The way she emphasized dying sent chills down my spine, despite the tropical temperature. According to Maria, an Aswang, a shape-shifting creature that feeds on human organs and unborn fetuses, typically lived for centuries. The concept of a dying Aswang was unprecedented in all recorded folklore. That night, Maria shared records kept by her grandmother, a Babaylan, spiritual leader who had documented Aswang activities in the region since the 1940s. The yellowed pages revealed a pattern I hadn't encountered in any academic text. When an Aswang approaches death, it becomes increasingly desperate and violent, seeking not just sustenance, but the essence of life itself. The first human victim was found 3 days after my arrival. Elena Reyes, 7 months pregnant, was discovered in her bedroom, her abdomen torn open with surgical precision. The official police report cited animal attack, but I noticed details they missed. The window was locked from the inside, and Elena's hands clutched strands of gray hair that seemed to turn to ash upon touch. The second attack occurred at the local clinic. Dr. James Rivera, performing a late-night inventory, survived but was left permanently traumatized. His account, which I recorded in the hospital, still haunts me. "It looked like my mother at first," he whispered, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. "But when it smiled, its face, it split. The tongue was so long, like a whip made of meat, and the eyes, they were backwards." He refused to say more, but the deep puncture wounds in his shoulder told their own story. The pattern of attacks intensified, but something was wrong. The Aswang was getting sloppy, leaving evidence that these creatures typically never would. Claw marks on walls, pools of black ichor that took days to evaporate, and most tellingly, witnesses who survived. Maria explained that this was unprecedented. An Aswang's power lay in its ability to remain undetected, to be dismissed as nightmare and superstition. This one seemed to be deteriorating. Local authorities remained skeptical until the incident at St. Michael's Church. During evening mass, the power failed, plunging the congregation into darkness. When the emergency lights flickered on, Father Antonio hung suspended from the ceiling, his body contorted impossibly backward, his eyes replaced by pulsing black sacs. He survived, but the man who emerged from that experience was fundamentally changed. I interviewed him weeks later at the psychiatric facility in Iloilo City. He spoke in ancient dialects that linguists couldn't identify, and his skin would blister in patterns that formed words in pre-colonial Baybayin script. The turning point came during my interview with Lola Conchita, a 92-year-old resident who remembered the last Aswang infestation in 1955. "They're not meant to die," she told me, her blind eyes somehow following my every movement. "When they do, they try to pass on their curse. They become desperate, like a drowning person who will pull down anyone nearby. She then shared a detail that changed everything. Aswang could only truly die if they failed to transfer their essence before their physical form expired. The final night remains fragmented in my memory. Maria had discovered the creature's daytime refuge in an abandoned Spanish colonial house on the outskirts of town. We assembled a group, not hunters but witnesses, armed with knowledge passed down through generations. The house reeked of decay and something sweeter, like overripe mangoes. In the basement, we found evidence of its deterioration: discarded skin husks, pools of black fluid that seemed to move on its own, and walls covered in scratch marks that formed coherent sentences in multiple languages. The confrontation itself defies conventional description. The creature we found was barely recognizable as the shapeshifter of legend. Its form constantly shifted. Elderly woman, young child, pregnant mother, all corrupted by decay and desperation. It spoke in voices I still hear in my nightmares, offering knowledge, power, and secrets of the universe in exchange for a vessel for its essence. The most horrifying aspect wasn't its appearance or abilities, but its fear. For the first time in recorded history, we witnessed an Aswang experiencing mortal terror. It begged in languages dead for centuries, offered wealth hidden by Spanish conquistadors, and finally, in its last moments, showed us visions of what waited in the spaces between life and death. Maria led the ritual that prevented its essence from transferring, a combination of ancient Babylon practices and Catholic rites. The creature's physical death was anticlimactic. It simply collapsed into a pile of rapidly aging tissue that turned to dust within minutes. But its psychological impact on the witnesses was profound. 2 participants later committed themselves to religious orders. One became selectively mute, and Maria started aging in reverse. The aftermath left more questions than answers. The police reports remain heavily redacted, the church maintains an official silence, and the site of the colonial house suffered a mysterious fire that burned at temperatures hot enough to melt stone. But the real legacy lives in the subtle changes to the community. The people of San Miguel developed an uncanny ability to identify falsehood, as if the Aswang's final gift was the power to see through any deception. I still return to San Miguel every few months, drawn by the lingering questions and the subtle wrongness that persists in the area. The sampaguita still blooms, but their scent carries a metallic undertone. Children are born with unusual birthmarks that fade into perfect Bye-Bye script. And sometimes, on particularly dark nights, the dogs still howl at shadows that move against the wind. This account serves as both warning and record. The death of an Aswang may seem like triumph, but it has transformed San Miguel in ways we're only beginning to understand. In the end, perhaps the true horror lies not in the creature's existence or even its death, but in the realization that some boundaries between myth and reality are better left uncrossed. As I write this final note, I can't help but notice that my reflection sometimes moves a fraction of a second too late. And the words I type occasionally rearrange themselves into ancient scripts I shouldn't be able to understand. Maria says these are normal side effects of witnessing an Aswang's death. I hope she's right, but lately I've been avoiding mirrors and keeping my own journal of changes. Just in case.